In the second learning outcome, we are going to be looking at focusing on a bit of key terminology which helps us in understanding how leaders can be made, or how leadership as a trait. When we looked at the traits and the skills of leadership in the learning outcome one, we discussed in correlation to some of the theories, the early theories, when the great man theory and the trait theory, which basically suggested that leaders are born and not made. But what we are looking at in this learning outcome two is to understand how do we see coaching and mentoring as two effective techniques which helps in the development of leadership and helps in the development of making successful managers. At some point in time in this learning outcome, we will also look at what are the trends which are kind of put in place by organizations which kind of promote the concept of learning and development within an organization. So there are concepts that we will look at, which are things like self-managed learning, SML. We'll also look at, how learning and development happens within the organization, and we get to hear from an HR perspective the role of training and development. And those things, we will look at how it promotes learning, both at personal and professional level. And that is looking at the concepts of how do you learn yourself, which is self-managed learning. How does the learning happen when you are working in an organization, and that is through the process of training and development. And then at some stage, we do see in the hierarchy wherein you have a lot of experience, you have a lot of qualifications, and you've worked within a particular discipline for a number of years, how then you look at gaining the finer skills to become a leader or a manager through the route of getting coaching and through the route of getting mentoring from senior colleagues or people who have number of years of experience within that particular role. So the idea would be to try and relate that to workplace learning. And then we will look at understanding how an organizational puts together, a strategy or a long-term strategy to have learning happening within the organization. Now, this learning could happen both at the individual level, could happen at the departmental level, and in general can also happen holistically at the organizational level. So a lot of modern day organizations now today look at, a clear plan. They have a clear plan, and a plan is put in place to look at an overall strategy for developing the organization, because most organizations are not today looking at hiring and firing resources. They're not looking at the recruitment and selection as an ongoing activity until unless they have to replace someone or if there is a redundancy. So what they tend to do is when they have resources with them, they look at when they hire resources or people or staff within the organization, they tend to develop them into roles, into functions by offering training and development, which is called in-house training and development, to be able to take up other roles and responsibilities within the organization. So I've got a presentation that I've put together, which primarily looks at, broadening what we also studied in Learning Outcome 1. Now, we are not looking at going through all the 54 slides here, because this presentation, when I give you, is something which is going to be focusing on relating Learning Outcome 1 and 2. And because in the Learning Outcome 1, we covered the leadership concepts, leadership theories and the management concepts briefly because they were summarized, this presentation would actually help you understand them in a bit more detail. And I have put some slides in which basically talk about leadership styles as well. So let's look at, I know that we've discussed about when we started what is leadership, and we looked at in the first learning outcome the definition of leadership and things like that. But now what we want to be able to do is understand what is the role of management, what and how do you define management. This is what we want to be able to look at. Now, the definition of management is basically looking at getting work done, or basically delegating work to peers or your colleagues in the organization. And at some point in time, you want to get this work done so that you are able to achieve the objectives or some major goals which have been set within the organization. Now, here sometimes it is important to understand that when we look at management, if you pick up a big organization which has lots of departments and there's a lot of people or staff working within the organization, the example of understanding how management works becomes easy. So on the slide, I put together an example of Walmart or one of the biggest, it is the biggest retailer in the world. Now, if you look at Walmart, turnover-wise, I think $400 billion plus dollars. They have over, 500,000 employees working across various countries. Now, the idea of understanding and taking what as a system is, when you look at this as an organization, what you'll get to see is that everything in the organization tends to work like clockwork. That means everything in terms of process, procedure is very clearly defined. And people, when they work in these roles, when they are hired to work within these roles, everything in terms of documentation, the employee code is all clearly laid out. And what then the new employee or a new person within a particular department does is picks that code, employee handbook or a code, and then starts to go through that. And that is what they kind of schedule in an induction or a training which goes through, before the employee starts to work within that role. Now, when you look at the number of workers, part-time and full-time workers working within the organization, Walmart has about 1.3 million workers, on a daily basis working within their stores. Now, some of them work within shifts. That means some of the stores open 24 hours, so they have workers which work within shifts. And when you look at those shifts, they can only be efficiently working to deliver the services to customers if the work has been scheduled by the manager, if the work has been put into some sort of a rota or a system by the manager. Now, that is where the effectiveness or, the efficiency of the organization comes across, because there are people who, who clearly know and they can get the work done from the colleagues, the peers, because they understand the importance of scheduling, they understand the importance of, the job description, and that is where they put the work in, so that the people, when they come in and start work, they know exactly what is to be done. There are not many ambiguities, and that is where the role of manager comes in, and the whole process through which it is being managed is the process of nothing but management. So you will see that Walmart as a company will look at hiring people in managerial position who have had similar work experience within the organization, and they know exactly what is required to be done in a full day schedule or in a day's work or in a shift, so that they are able to get the work accomplished. Otherwise, what will happen is you will see that the manager sets a job or sets a work, but obviously it's not done because the person is either inexperienced, does not have the skills or the traits to be able to do that job role. Now, before they are inducted into that role or they are given that job to do, the HR department makes sure that the employee has received a proper induction, the skill testing has been done, and the skills are relevant to the job responsibility being given to the person. And that is what will differentiate management or the role of a manager from being a leader. Leadership tends to be more of inspiration, or people who are able to influence, get in them behind you or in some sort of a team to be able to achieve a longer term objective. So if I have to look at, we will do some differentiations now between when we know the definition of management and leadership. We want to know management is more concerned about things like planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. These are terminologies that we see related to a manager or people in management, because once the goals are set, once the mission and the vision is set, the long-term objectives are set, the management has to get down to ensuring that the work being, the targets or the goals being set are then broken down into smaller objectives, tasks, and they are then accomplished. So that involves the process of planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. But when you look at leadership, it focuses on long term. It focuses on things which are sometimes not tangible. That means they are not well documented. It talks about where and how the organization will reach that goal. And those things are more, kind of functions of what we call leadership. So if I have to look at kind of doing some sort of a differentiation between the concept of manager the concept of management and leadership, and look at, kind of doing a differentiation between a manager and a leader, you will see that these are the differences which we get to see. So a manager would focus on the present, a leader looks at the future or focuses on long term essentially. A manager would look at stability, and a leader would look at appreciating change, because they are focused on how the organization can change to achieve more, how the organization can achieve a change to basically achieve the goal which is required to be achieved. Short-term, long-term, as I mentioned. So manager would focus on, within Walmart, if I look at operations of stores on a day-to-day basis, if the operations are not managed well, there is no point in having leadership within the organization, because the customers will not be served, the material or the things which are being sold will not be available. And that is where the criticality of operations via management is more important than leadership in that organization, because the processes are well set, policies, procedures are well set, and the organization is looking at operational efficiency, for which they require managers rather than leaders. Yes, leadership comes in the case of Walmart, when Walmart embraced the online grocery side of things. So for them, brick and mortar model, that means the stores were more important. But as internet has gotten hold, people then have options to buy products and order products to Amazon, eBay, and some of the other options, and in the other countries. A lot of these large retailers have now started to address the online side of things, which is saying that we need to have an online presence, e-commerce, and the customer should be able to offer and order and buy things online. And that is where leadership came in, because they saw that the business model and the customer preferences are changing. And in order to adapt to those changes, what the leadership at Walmart has done is they've identified online as one of the key strategies for the company to be able to grow the business. So whatever product lines they have in the store, they have the same product lines available online. And then with that, they put a strategy in place to say, okay, you can order and deliver, and we can deliver even grocery products the same day, and you can choose delivery intervals or, time frames in which the delivery can be done by a man in a van, and, you can order things like bananas, milk, and all that stuff. So that required leadership, because in the long term, they saw a change in customer preferences happening, and because of which the company had to embrace that strategy of having an online presence like the others, which were, like the other stores. Like if you look at other stores in Europe and elsewhere, like Carrefour, for example, Tesco's, which was present in America but has pulled out. You look at Seven, which is again one of the large retail stores in America. When you look at Costco, for example, cost cutters of Costco, they've embraced online much before than Walmart did, and Walmart required a leadership change or a challenge at the leadership level to be able to move the company towards not just being focused on the stores, but also being focused on online as a strategy for offering some of these services. So there's a clear differentiation when we look at the two concepts, and that is what is kind of summarized here. So when you look at the day-to-day operations, the wastage and packaging and all that stuff might not be managerial concern, but when we look at that with an environmental perspective, from a long-term perspective, that the organizations are now having to have corporate social responsibility, are having to look at environmental waste and recycling. That is a change which is instituted at the leadership level, and that is why you will see leadership tends to come into areas wherein it is sometimes long-term and it is related to the vision. It kind of looks at social responsibility and certain aspects which are long-term important for the branding, the overall image of the organization, the growth of the organization, where the revenues will come. A manager might not be concerned in terms of looking at, should we expand to this country, or should we look at this market, which is a growing market now. So if you look at Africa in particular, we have markets like Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Zimbabwe. These are very high volume growing markets in terms of middle class. So if the company has to look at expansion plan, a manager might not be interested in looking at where we expand and what we do, but the leadership would be looking at expanding into other markets. So the other day when you mentioned the example of the MCN Telecom, now MCN Telecom started off in Nigeria, but I think from whatever I have read, they are now present in MTN or MCN. They are present in 2 or 3 other countries as well, and they are expanding their presence across MTN. So they're expanding their presence across other African countries to grow the business. And that is where leadership is coming in as against the management, because management is more concerned about managing the operation, running the day-to-day function. But when it comes to expansion, when it comes to long-term vision, when it looks at growth, revenue, you will see that leadership is required rather. Is that okay? Now, some of the slides I have kind of summarized.
Now, you said the differences between a manager and a leader.
Yes.
Because what you wrote there, you said a manager is happy in complexity, while a leader prefers, is it simplicity or simplify?
It's
Because I
simplicity.
feel that it was simplicity. But
They prefer to
simplify.
simplify. They prefer to simplify. When I say, sometimes you will see that managers are able to manage a couple of things. When I say complexity, they're happy to multitask. So in a store like Walmart, we are going to stick to the example of Walmart. You will see that there's a general store, there's a operations director in the store, and under the operations director, there's a general manager. Now the general manager is able to manage everything in the store. So he's also dealing with HR. He might have other colleagues within the structure, like an HR manager, finance manager, a logistics or warehousing manager, things like that, a floor manager. But he's happy to deal with complexity because what he's looking at doing is he has a full-on knowledge of all the functions within the departments, and that is why he's a general manager. So he's happy with complexity because he's happy with multitasking. He's able to take on and delegate and monitor a lot of different types of roles and responsibilities under him as a structure. But when you look at a leader there'll be one or two. So you'll have the CEO, you'll have a chief SR officer or a chief financial officer, and what they do is they look at getting hold of information or data in the simplest possible form, which is knowledge for them to be able to take decisions. So when I say they prefer to simplify, now if you are an accounting manager or you look after accounts, or a finance manager in the company, what you're looking at is you're dealing with cash flow, day-to-day invoicing. You're also getting an interim profit and loss that is being generated. You're also looking at balance sheet. But that same information, when it goes to somebody who's the leader, that means a chief financial officer or somebody who's the financial controller in that organization, he or she actually wants to look at a simplified statement, which is to say, okay, let me just look at balance sheet. Let me just look at profit and loss account, because that will give him a position as of that date of what are the finances within the company, because that is what will be useful for the person to be able to make decisions. Now, he is not bothered about the nitty-gritty of operations, that how many invoices are unpaid or how many people are actually debtors, or where the credit is being given more and things like that. But they are interested in understanding what is the total debt, what is the total receivable, what is the the position which is on as of date in terms of cash at bank, and that is where they look at simplification. So they prefer to look at situations or information from a point of view of simplistic. They want to simplify. They look at one report, but the manager in that same position or in that same department would look at all the information before they look at because they're not in the decision making, so they have to ensure that all the information is coming to them. Is that okay? Now, the other thing so this is again some differences as per Kotter, differences between managers and differences between leaders, and this is relating to the planning, organizing, coordinating, controlling, and commanding as a parameter, just to highlight those differences. Right. Okay. Give me 1 second.
I had a bit of a dizzy spell type thing in the bathroom. Is it all right if I go ahead and okay, I'm really sorry.
No problem. So the other thing, when we look at the type of leadership, we covered the 4 different styles on that day, but we didn't go into detail. So here in the slides, just for the perspective of understanding, what I've done is I've put some detailed slides in so that you be these styles, but the idea would be to try and go through them so that you are aware that these are the 4 styles of leadership sometimes that we get to see within the organization when we look at it. So just going through 1 or 2 slides here. Now, there are 4 styles. One is autocratic, and the autocratic style basically talks about the person being quite independent, and this person wants to be in a commanding position. And here what you will get to see is that the person essentially wants to take or make all the decisions. Now, there are some advantages and some disadvantages. You get to see this kind of a style normally in, say, armed forces, or in situations wherein there are when the organization structure is small, the business is small, and you will get to see that the owner is also the decision maker in those situations. Now, the disadvantages could be that obviously there are some when you do not have a participative style or people coordinating and inputting into taking decisions, you will see that sometimes because the brainstorming or the discussions cannot happen in full, you will get to see that decision or the quality of decisions tends to be poor. You will also see that if the decision making is not delegated at certain levels within the organization, you will see that sometimes it leads to poor motivation amongst employees, that managers feel that we have the responsibility to manage the staff, get the work done, delegate, and operationalize effectively, monitor. But when it comes to decision making in terms of incentives, bonuses, or looking at smaller decision making which could happen at a level which the manager could do, they do not have any delegation on that, and that leads to something called demotivation, and you normally see a bit of a turnover happening in that organization. The other leadership style that we talk about is democratic, and here we look at the leader kind of looks at participation from everyone. I say everyone. If it's a large department, you're a general manager, you have 5 different managers working with you to manage other responsibilities, like we discussed. In a store in Walmart, you'll have finance, human resource, warehousing, logistics, and the manager takes input. The general manager takes input from these 5 managers, which are working with him directly. Then he looks at a style which encourages participation in decision making, and this is where he uses the skills and the traits that he has as a leader to kind of look at persuasive and consultative, decision making. So he will want to hear the viewpoints of the colleagues to see that if they are kind of, relevant, and in some cases he will also look at, making sure that they are able to have their say, and if they give suggestions which have merit and obviously are leading to say some sort of a saving or a better solution for the store or for the organization, then they tend to take them on board, and that is where you will have the leadership style being democratic. Now, the third style that we look at is laissez-faire, which basically means here the leader actually delegates the decision making to maybe other colleagues within the organization. So effectively, the person in the management or the leadership position does not take a decision. He delegates to his staff that you decide what needs to be done, you decide what is best. And here, what you will see, sometimes decision making does not happen, for a long. So decision making in some cases is prolonged. That means decision making sometimes cannot happen, and it is a question of where you will get to see that people would kind of not reach decisions easily. Now, what we want to be able to do is understand which leadership style is best or which is suited. Now, as we discussed first learning outcome, this is sometimes you will see different leaders or different people in different positions make and use of different styles depending on the situation, depending on the function of the department they're in, the kind of responsibility they have, and whether they want work to be done from a point of view. If it's a small organization, so size of the organization, structure, culture of the organization, sometimes the function kind of depends on what kind of leadership style is adapted within the organization or by the person who's in that position. So the other slides which I want to now, in the first learning outcome, we looked at theories of leadership, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the first learning outcome, we also want to understand what are the theories of management. Now, there are 5 theories of management which have evolved over the years, and these are, obviously theories which came across that we have studied, not studied, but we've looked at for leadership, but for management, we need to understand. So there are 5 different ones. One is scientific management theory. There is a management principle theory by Henry Foyle. We look at, bureaucracy theory, which was, initiated by the German scientist Max Weber. We also have human relations approach, which was kind of, put forward by a series of studies, which was done by some American, scientists during the industrialization, and that was called the Hawthorne Studies. And this is where they put together, some sort of a service model within the factory, and they did some experiments, and over the experiments they came up with this concept of behavioralist approach when working with human resources within an organization. And then we have the contingency school of thought, which has evolved over the years, and we look at the theories of management. So what I've done is briefly I have summarized these theories primarily onto 1 or 2 slides. And the the idea would be to try and go through this, because it will be fundamental understanding the theoretical concept of why management came across as a function, how the differentiation of management has happened over the years, and to a certain extent understand the moving phase of how the definition of management is changing over the years. Now, I have a handout which I will also send you, which will be for you to read, and that will give you the details of all these theories rather than at this point just one odd slides that we get to see them to discuss. So, if you ask me honestly, this is something which is a reading to do to be able to understand the various concepts which came across, and my suggestion would be this is something that you can do offline rather than go through during the session. So apart from this, in this particular presentation, which is more or less related to, I would say, learning outcome 1, adding on to some of the that we covered on that day, would be to move on to our bit of the learning outcome 2, specifically focus on understanding, developing, and learning happens, and the key concepts of coaching and mentoring. Is that okay?
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to this presentation in a couple of minutes when we look at discussing task 1.3, which is talking about primarily the trends of workplace learning and the flexibility which organizations today provide in terms of working practices when we look at employees within the organization. Now, part of this, we understand one thing which I would put here that I want you to understand. Normally, when you study something related to management, you will also study something related to leadership. When you study management and leadership together, an important component of management and leadership at some stage is also motivation. It comes across in different facets. So you will talk, sometimes you will see there are talks about it, which talk about employee motivation, which talk about I don't have enough motivation to work, or the motivational, the emoluments that I get, the bonus structure, wages, salaries that I get are not enough motivation for me to continue in this role. So when you get to hear these 3 different types of perspectives, what we need to be able to do is at some time relate the theories of motivation to the concepts of leadership and management as well. Is that okay? And that's what I've done is, in order to understand that, I've just put in some motivational theory here for you to understand how leaders use motivation as a tool to, or these theories which can be used as a motivational tool when delegating work to employees within the organization. How leaders will use motivational theories to put long-term benefits or incentives into place for managers to work effectively and get the work done. So, at one point in time, important for us to understand how motivation, what role does motivation play when you look at leadership and when you look at the role of management. And here, the application of motivational theory and the application in terms of how they are applied to leadership and management concepts is important, and that's why I put them together in some of these slides here. Okay?
Okay.
Not really related to this, but when we look at jumping into the first unit that we did, primarily when we started the course, which was understanding, human relations, understanding human resource functions, and the idea is at some point in time as an HR manager, you have to have, certain things that you do to create motivational trends within the organization. And it's a good thing if you could look at revising some of that, and relating it to an application. So why do you think HR managers put together incentive schemes? We talked about things like foreign travel trips as an incentive or as a perk. Look at things like dental insurance, medical insurance. These are all motivational things when they are applied at various levels. So if you look at employee stock option plan, when you get stocks at the management level, there they require motivation, which is not just financial in terms of a few $1,000 or pounds. They look at motivation from a long-term perspective. So when you look at banking, when you look at some of the people who work in senior positions within organizations, at some stage when they've achieved a title, they've achieved a certain position, they've managed a number of employees, there the motivation is financial. Now, financial motivation does not mean that they will need something which is When you look at Maslow's theory of hierarchy, at stage they have motivations which are physical, safety, which is job security. They want the organization to love them, loyalty. And at some stage, when it comes to esteem, you're looking at position, you're looking at a title. But after that, when that has happened, they look at self-actualization. What am I worth? What am I worth for this organization? And that is where employee stock options plan come in. So I have to put here, just as an example, the various things that I could put in with regards to, here I have to say what are psychological motivation, what is safety motivation, if I have to put in, and then if I have to put in something which involves self-actualization, then I can differentiate the tools which an HR manager can use to put across various levels. At the physiological level, I might want to bring in a tool which is basically saying you get pension, you get some holidays, but at the safety level, after the probation period is over, I would say, okay, if you have to hire and fire you, there's a 6 weeks notice or an 8 weeks notice, and that kind of tends to give you a bit of social security on your job. But when it comes to loving or being liked within the organization, here the organization would put in sweeteners in terms of motivation, like you are given some increase in salary every year, performance appraisal or training and development. When your performance appraisal is done, your training and development takes priority within the organization because they are grooming you to become a leader or take an additional or a senior role. When it comes to esteem, it talks about title. I'm the head of so, or I'm a general manager, I'm vice president. So here the esteem is taking over, and what the organization is trying to do is, apart from giving you, things like options of taking on more responsibility, they are also elevating you in terms of your title within the organization, or you might be given an additional responsibility like you are the spokesperson for the organization when it comes to press and things like that. And that is where esteem kind of falls in. And when you look at self-actualization, you're looking at, what am I worth? What is the ultimate aim? So when people at senior positions, which are in their mid-40s, late 50s, late 40s and early 50s, they want to look at, okay, I've worked for 25 years or I've worked for 20 years for this organization. What am I worth? So here the organization cannot motivate them by giving them holidays, incentive packages, job safety, or, title, because they've achieved all that. They can get the self-actualization happening basically through the route of something which is going to be financially more rewarding, which a lot of people do not get. And one such option that I can talk about will be things like, a stock option plan, which would mean that you get certain number of stocks which you can divest after 2 years, 3 years, and that would mean you will get 100,000 or 200,000 worth of increment in terms of salary, which is normally not possible when we look at a stage-wise salary structure. So motivation and motivational theories are important to relate to in the context of leadership and management, because they are inevitably used by managers and leaders at some point in time when they are using, when they are basically, delegating work or creating, work for the employees or peers in the organization. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I will come back to this a bit later, but let me go on to something which is talking about, now the concept of what to understand is coaching and mentoring.
Okay.
Now, if we have to look at, what is coaching and mentoring, let's look at the basics in terms of defining coaching. Now, what is coaching? Coaching talks about a process wherein managers, supervisors kind of, aim to solve performance and, problems. But here, you will basically be dependent on maybe a coach or a person who has already gone through that situation, right? So a process through which you will look at problem solving as an approach, but will depend on somebody who has gone through that and can then share that experience for you to be able to overcome that problem or that issue. And that, concept will be primarily defined as coaching. Now, coaching can happen at 3 levels, or it can involve 3 different things. Coaching can happen when you need technical help, right? You use a PC, you use a Mac, for example, in this case, and you remember the days when we were looking at starting the first conference, there was a bit of, you're a proficient user of, IT yourself. You have a Mac, you were able to do most of the things like emailing and stuff, but maybe a particular problem that we were having during the sessions at that point in time was possible to solve when I basically coached you or took you through the process of understanding how this would work or why is it not working. And that was mostly alluding to something like a technical help that I gave you to get onto this session on using Join Me. Sometimes you will see coaching requires personal support. That means you need one-on-one support. So in that situation itself, we did a one-on-one session or support on WhatsApp, and I was telling you what you see, you were talking and relaying the information. Okay, this is what I'm seeing, but this is something which is not happening. And then we diagnosed the problem, and then because it required personalized support, so a tele support that you receive sometimes when you have a problem, when you call up the call center, it's like the person on the other side has gone through that problem, is able to talk you through, personally supporting you to overcome that problem. And then sometimes you will see coaching is also involving individual challenge. That means, this is something that you are aware of, you have knowledge about, but you have to overcome that, primarily through your own self by looking at either reading, maybe looking at the user manual and going through some of the steps, because you had that personal support, you had that technical help, but it's still not solved the problem because you're somewhere not doing something right. And that requires you to take up that challenge individually. And that means you're having to go through the process of reading the user manual and then solving the particular question. So here, when we look at the concept of, coaching, you're trying to solve issues or problems, and it is being done through the help or aid of somebody who has been through that particular, problem on their own and comes to your help or aid to kind of take you through that, or talk you through that, or kind of walk you through that situation to remove that issue or that problem. Now let's look at mentoring. Mentoring talks about it's a process through which you sometimes learn something which can only be done over a point in time. Like you've heard about this concept called mirroring or shadowing. Sometimes what your superiors ask you to do is, can you shadow him in his role, or can you follow up and follow him or her closely on what the person is doing. And the idea there is the person is actually asking you to kind of follow the other person around, or, when I say not literally the word follow, but the person is asking you to observe the other person to see how things are being done. So sometimes when you join an organization and you're new and you have a number of colleagues who have joined the new position, what they tend to do is, can you follow me? Can you observe me, what I'm doing? And then, what you tend to do is you pick that up. And when you pick that up, you're able to then independently do it at your own, and you kind of become at some point in time independent once you've had the understanding of how this is done. Now, in this case, in order to understand something like this, what I would suggest is we look at, something called, which is, when we talk about the, like tacit knowledge, this is a concept when we talk about tacit. Tacit, if you look at the dictionary meaning of the word tacit, it basically means you have an understanding or an implied understanding of something without it being stated, without it being spoken about. Now, sometimes you will see that you are facing situations wherein you have some sort of a knowledge that you say, it's something that I already have. So when you say tacit knowledge, it is a kind of knowledge which is sometimes difficult to transfer, but you know that you have that knowledge with you, right? Sometimes I tell you, can you tell me how to, solve this riddle? You can solve the riddle yourself, but you do not have, sometimes it is difficult to explain how to solve this. So if I give you an example of, Rubik's Cube, have you ever had a go at the Rubik's Cube?
No.
All right, okay, the Rubik's Cube, the cube which basically you juggle around. If I have to kind of, just show you a Rubik's Cube. This is a Rubik's Cube. Now, sometimes what happens is when you speak to people, friends and family, what they can do is if you give the cube, they can quickly solve it, right? But they do not know the logic of explaining it to you how to solve it. Okay. So that is something which is called tacit knowledge. That means you have the knowledge to be able to solve it, but it is sometimes difficult to transfer or explain that how you're solving it, right?
Yes.
look at the concept of mentoring, we talk about this particular concept called ATHE, because this is something that you are aware of, you know how it is to be, but sometimes it becomes difficult to kind of effectively translate that literally to another colleague. So what they have to do is they have to observe you, work with you, follow you, mirror you, shadow you, whatever you call it, to be able to gain that knowledge over a period in time or over a point in time, right? So mentoring process is long-term, coaching as a process is short-term. And when I'm saying this is because sometimes you will see that mentoring requires, now if you look at leadership, leadership requires coaching and mentoring both. But if somebody is quite junior enough in the organization and has not had that many number of years of experience, for him to get into a leadership position might require the process of mentoring, because the person will need to be trained in a number of things over a point in time to be able to get that knowledge to become a leader. But if I look at somebody who's got 20 years of experience and has been in the department head position or a position wherein he manages a number of employees or staff, then for him to get into leadership position might be easier, because that would require only coaching for a short time period or an interval to say that, okay, you can become a leader. So when we look at mentoring, it is more of a process which basically happens over a point in time. It involves the process of having something which is called tacit knowledge. That means it's difficult to transfer sometimes to another person, and you have to write it down, or you have to kind of, visualize it so that you are able to kind of transfer it on. So, and mentoring are two important concepts which are related to leadership and management. And the reason for us to understand these concepts, you need to be able to apply coaching and mentoring at some point in time, when you are in leadership or management position. So let's look at the differences. Like we've done differences between leader and manager, we need to be able to look at differences of coaching and mentoring. Now, coaching typically tends to happen when you see, like an example here is inappropriate behavior, right? You have a kid and he's done something wrong. What you do is you immediately look up to him and say, okay, you should not have done this. This looks bad, or this is embarrassing. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to coach him to say that this is not something right. And in order to do this, you do not need to do this. You have to do it this way. And that is coaching. Mentoring would be you're supporting and guiding by providing some sort of a detailed guidance, or, in this way, you could also tell your kid that, okay, if I had asked you to do this, you could have done this in this way, right? And what you've done is you've through the process by talking through it and then showing it in person how it needs to be done. So you see the difference. Coaching is you're verbally told it, but mentoring would have been in this case for the person to get the full idea of what is required, would have been done through the route of showing the person and guiding him to do the process on its own. And that would be mentoring. Is that okay?
Okay.
Now we look at the process of coaching, it's mostly direct learning. You will look at somebody, you will speak to somebody on the phone, they will give you a bit of support, and you'll tend to do it as they do it over the phone, or they ask you to follow some instructions. And once you've done the follow-up on the instructions, what tends to happen is that you're able to, accomplish that task. But in the case of mentoring, you're basically, asking the learner to be in charge of its own learning. Like, I cannot teach somebody to play the guitar. You can look at somebody playing the guitar, but you're not able to pick up playing the guitar unless you physically go out and do it and practice over a point in time to be able to learn how to play the chords. Correct?
Sure.
You see the difference? I can assemble a piece of furniture by looking at the user manual, and that is like a bit of coaching which is being done because the manufacturer has created a user manual, and if I follow the steps, I'm able to assemble the table. But if I look at the same process of mentoring, if I have to teach somebody a guitar, that might not be possible. They can do some sessions with me, they can observe me, but unless they get down to practicing it or basically revising it over a point in time, they cannot learn how to play the chords. So the difference is coaching versus mentoring.
Yes, can I ask a question here?
Go ahead.
Growing up, most times when we say someone is a mentor, some
Yes.
people we look up to as mentors, we have not met them one-on-one before.
Yes.
So in the situation where you've not met your mentor
Yes.
before, would you say is your mentor? Because you're making it sound now like you have to have a one-on-one interaction or relationship with mentors. But some of us are not privileged to even know these mentors. For instance, I read a lot about Ben Carson.
Yes.
Because
okay.
It inspires me so much to, be the best I could in my field of study too. But I've never met him before. And I regard him as one of the mentors that inspire me to do great in life. So would I say he's not my mentor because I'm not seeing him one-on-one to, teach me or put me through how to go about things, how to be successful in life. I have to monitor the way or study the way he does things. Because I never have the privilege to meet him or see him one-on-one. So is it possible to have a mentor from far away, like long distance? The person does not even know you that you're his mentee. The person does not know you as a mentee, but you yourself see the person as a mentor, and you just follow closely what the person is doing via social media, or you read their books, or anything pertaining to them.
See, it is what you asked me is a very good question. Now, sometimes, let me answer it this way and give you my perspective. Now, sometimes what happens is you see people as leaders and you get influenced by the qualities or the morals or the things they stand for. And what you tend to do in that case is you tend to take them emotionally as people who are leaders, but they are also something that you are trying to emulate from your point of view in terms of personality. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to follow that person. And when you look at following that person to kind of get some of the things or changes that you want to see, or maybe you want to emulate things in terms of your personality, over a point in time, you see them as your mentors, even though you have not met them. So, for example, a lot of people would look at, I know I mentioned this as an example, and I think it should be easy to relate, was that when you look at Barack Obama, the first black president in the US, a lot of people were able to relate to him because he brought across and brought out some of the key things which were not being spoken about in the society. So a lot of people, what they did was, they haven't met him, they haven't seen him, but the policies and the things that he was doing on ground as a president were having a larger impact on people and their lives in terms of cheap opinions, in terms of the way things were being seen in different light. And that is where people were able to associate with him, saying that, I like what he's doing. I see that there is a change that he's bringing. And his whole campaign, when you saw the second term that he fought, was about change. And the first term that he fought when he became the president first time was about change. And a lot of people related to that aspect. So people like me, I haven't met him, but I can correlate to what he's actually prognosing or, prescribing, that we need change in the society. Now, that is where I do see him as a bit of a mentor, even though I've not met him, because the thoughts that he's bringing out or the things that he's putting out are the things that I and my personality also correlates to. So I see him as a mentor, even though I've not met him. So in that case, you can say sometimes you will feel people having this as a concept when they want to have somebody as a mentor. You remember, I think a good number of years back, before the internet came on, people had the concept of something called pen friends or pen pals. You had friends in different countries and you used to write letters and, that's how you were in touch. And I'm talking 30, 40 years back, my father's generation primarily. So he had friends in other countries because they were pen pals, or they were people who met maybe through the youth club and things like that, but maybe once in 10 years or 15 years, and then they remained as friends. But over the years, the concept was that, okay, some of them were people that he met which were influential, and those influential people he remained in touch with them, and he kind of treated them as their mentors because his ideals meant or had a match with the people's that he had contact with, and those ideals which had a match, because of them, he took them as a person that he could correlate to, and he primarily treated him as a mentor. So this particular concept that you said is very valid. Sometimes you don't get to the people or meet them, but you kind of associate with them because of the personality or the actions that they do, and because they are having a long-term impact on how you're shaping up your personality or your outlook, you tend to treat them as mentors. And you say that, virtually he is a mentor to me, even though you've not met him. But what you are actually meaning in this case is he is like a mentor to you because you believe in the same qualities and the things that the person is actually prescribing or, is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good stuff. There are some myths about coaching and, mentoring. So some of the myths that we look at is, after the differences that we look at is coaching is for losers. Sometimes they say you flunked your driving test, you need a bit more coaching. You're not getting good marks in your exams, you need a bit of coaching. And that's a myth. Coaching is not for losers. Coaching is basically looking at the aspect of you having to improve on certain things which you do not have skills on or knowledge on. Is that okay? Coaching is about, filling the leadership behavior gap. No, it is wrong. Coaching is about making sure that you are able to grasp onto things which are required which actually require you to show leadership traits in situations when you're trying to solve problems. Another myth is coaching talks about, separating leadership development from, any sort of activity. No, that is a myth. The reality is, when you look at coaching, a person gets into coaching when he has a substantial number of years of experience, has been in that position, and can do that thing time and again, or can inspire to do that thing, or inspire that quality or that trait in his colleagues or peers, and that is where leadership comes in. So coaching becomes a part of leadership because you do not want to do those things repeatedly yourself, but what you want to be able to do is coach your peers, your colleagues, or people around you to be able to do those things even though when you're not around. And that is where coaching becomes important, because successful leaders, they believe in coaching people around them so that things which are required to be done can be delegated and they can move on to doing important or other things which are required. So there are some myths that are kind of put up here on the slide, and the idea is to kind of use these myths and look at them and then say, okay, this is not correct, this is correct, and it gives you a perspective of where all coaching can get involved. Now, let's look at what are the benefits of coaching. Benefits of coaching could be, when you look at benefits, it helps in developing employees. Leave the bit of KSA out because this is something which is a presentation I did for some of the employees, from Saudi Arabia. So that is why. Now, coaching looks at developing employees, because when you look at I had an oil and gas company which basically looked at, understanding how do they create managers, because there was an increase required, because as a company they were expanding into another plant, and they had a sudden requirement of about 25 managers to be able to take up those positions. So what they did was they wanted supervisors working under the current managers to be able to take those managerial positions. So they did a course wherein they brought primarily these people out to understand how they could do coaching, how the managers could coach the employees, supervisors for about 3 months, so that they could get these traits and qualities and transfer of skill set to be able to work in managerial positions within the new setup. Coaching also involves, solving problems. It increases productivity, because when I look at my own, center as an office or as a center, I don't want to be doing some of these things again and again. So sometimes some repeated things I need to do, I can teach some of the other employees within the organization. And what then that means is they do not need to come back to me to get this done. They basically can do it on their own. And that would mean it increases productivity because they know a new skill now, or they know a new thing that they can do themselves. And that leads to productivity. So some of these things, also are benefiting retention or employee retention, is because when you look at, delegating people with responsibilities and teaching them things or skills which they can, use to do day-to-day operational things, you see that employee motivation goes up, staff turnover goes down, because they feel empowered to be able to do those things. And that is where the importance of coaching actually comes in, and it promotes, positive work culture. Now, if you have a manager, sometimes you've seen this as a situation or you've heard about this, is that sometimes you have people which talk about that I have a manager who's quite, he's very helpful. He gets into a lot of detail while explaining things to us for the first time, or when he delegates certain jobs to me, my manager basically explains them in a bit more detail. And that allows me to accomplish the tasks, quicker and in a better fashion. And that tends to talk about, a culture wherein the manager is being positive and he or she is actually trying to share his or her knowledge, also the issues when the person is faced, so that the colleague or the person who is actually now looking at doing the role does not face those issues. So it then kind of promotes a bit of positive work culture when you see that happening, and that is one of the benefits of coaching. Now, one of the other things that you can see is sometimes you will see that as an HR manager, you will have trainee managers or trainee HR managers. And what you will do is, any performance appraisals, you will take one of the trainee managers with you in the meeting or in the performance appraisal to sit and observe how the appraisal is being done. So coaching sometimes also tends to look at imparting knowledge or transfer of skill set by looking at observing and also getting them involved in some of the activities that you do within the HR field. Like you have a trainee, you have a trainee manager. It could be a trainee manager in training and development, trainee manager in, for example, accounts, trainee manager in, for example, HR, trainee manager. And you have these on-job trainings which sometimes people get onto. And the idea there is they want to be able to see and observe how you're looking at, doing the work and how you're accomplishing a particular task. And that tends to be the process of coaching. And coaching then effectively speeds up the process of other person picking up that trait by observing his senior colleague or maybe his, the other person within that to kind of pick up that job or, pick up skill or pick up that trait. So that is where we talk about, the differences of coaching and mentoring. Now, there are some guiding principles when you look at the concept of leader and coach, and we talk about that in totality. And these are some principles that are put together, which have been taken from the book, Kogan's book, and they talk about that, a leader is a coach, but is also, a teacher, but has the command and control. So when we look at the key functions of planning, coordinating, controlling, a leader who is a successful coach will always have things like being in a commanding position and also having the control of the situation. Coaching, sometimes you will see, is about standing in for people's race. That means, it talks about taking ownership, wherein you do not want to be always saying that I have done this or I have accomplished this, but they tend to say the team has been able to accomplish it, and I would have not been able to do this without the support of so and so. So coaching takes an overall, perspective in terms of taking acknowledgement or praise sometimes, as against mentoring, wherein the person is working one-on-one and the credit actually goes to the person who's mentoring that particular mentee, and as against coaching, because coaching can be done in numbers, but mentoring is normally done in one-on-one. You could be a mentor to about 5 people, 10 people that you're mentoring, but each of them is being mentored on a one-on-one basis. But when you look at coaching, you will see that you can get into a room, and sometimes when you go to a park or you go on a holiday and you want to say participate in water sports, what tends to happen is, or you're going on a general safari, what tends to happen is, or you're getting onto a quad bike, what will happen is you will see that the person or the trainer who's your guide will actually ask everyone to gather around, and they'll say, okay, follow me, do this, don't do this, and he's trying to do coaching in numbers. But when it is mentoring, the difference is when you're looking at, say, doing a water sport and you're going to do a scuba dive, the trainer or the person will not say 5, 6 of you, can you put on your oxygen thing, can you put on this? He will go and individually check, because it is life-threatening. It is going to be individually done, and that is where you will see that he's kind of mentoring you to understand how to breathe in and breathe out, how not to panic, and do those kind of things. Do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, clear enough?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where, to be honest, today what I'll do is I'll stop. So it is, I'm kind of happy, if you're happy, that we've covered, this particular, learning outcome, and we've looked at, coaching and mentoring in a bit more detail. Now, just going back to one or two slides specifically for workplace, learning, and the concept of how learning happens within the organization. That is what I want to just look at, maybe one or two slides. Now, this relates to the concept of, why do we want to look at why there is flexibility which organizations provide to employees today? Can you think of why do organizations provide flexibility to employees today?
Could you please repeat your question? I didn't get that.
Okay, let me rephrase it. Why do you think organizations nowadays provide a bit of flexibility in terms of working within, the working to employees? Things like you can work from home, you have flexible timings in terms of work. You can
just to get, basically, for them to get the best out of the employees. If a job is flexible, then the employee would want to give in more. They want to put in their best to make sure the company is at the top notch. But if it's not flexible and you just use the whole of their energies and all, they get frustrated at times and, they do things they are not supposed to do, and you don't get the best out of them. But if there's flexibility in the workplace, it allows the employees to make arrangements about working conditions that suit them themselves. Do you understand? And is able to maintain, because most times if a job is not flexible enough, you can't be able to balance work and your life.
That is correct.
Family life, you can't balance it. But if it's flexible, you can be able to do those together, and you can be able to improve on the productivity and efficiency of your job description towards a better achievement for the organization.
Yes, spot on. So if I look at some of the things that you've said and used, things like productivity, things like flexibility, things like creativity, the reason, and you've answered that very correctly. So reason why organizations look at flexibility today is that they want to get the best output and productivity from their employees. They want them to be able to, kind of work and stay motivated within the organization. And all these are effects of leadership style. So when you talk about having these flexible work policies or flexibility in terms of working within the organization, they at some point in time tend to correlate to either motivation, creativity, flexibility, bit of credibility, trust and respect, that you love the organization that you work for because they are accommodating. You look at productivity and you look at commitment or loyalty. Now, why this is there, you've answered already. Now let's look at what does it provide. When you look at flexible working practices, it provides greater autonomy. That means the employees have control of what is to be delivered, and they have a sense of responsibility to be able to deliver that. So sometimes you will see some employees within the organization have that autonomy that, okay, when you see senior management people, they have the flexibility of coming in late or working late or, working from home, because they know that the task is important, and as long as the task is being done or I'm delivered on that objective or the responsibility, I have that flexibility to be able to work from home or work from, say, from the office. Now, the flexibility is the aspect of why sometimes you will see that this allows, when you've covered the point like better personal work-life balance, more variety in work, and nowadays the millennial generation, as we call it, they are looking at multiple income streams. People today are opting to work as contractors or, work on contracts or short-term contracts rather than work on full-time employment, because they want to be able to see that they are able to get multiple income streams. You see a lot of things which were not there a couple of years back, things like, contractors, people used to work within organization. They used to say, I need to get a job, I need to get a permanent job. But nowadays, a lot of people are temping. And they are temping because they're able to get that flexibility of working at, 10 pounds an hour, 20 pounds an hour, 15 pounds an hour, and they're able to kind of spread their risk. So this is an important concept wherein leaders and managers have to kind of grapple with and balance that. If you have different types of people within the organization with different skills and experience, you have to be able to kind of look at how do you give them flexibility in terms of working, and that flexibility in terms of working can create loyalty, can create commitment, more productivity, motivation, and overall give you the work which is required to be done. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, one last thing which we look at, and I'm going to try and flip through one of the other presentation slides. So this is something I will upload. Give me 1 second. I'm going to unshare screen for a second, and then 1 minute, bring that back on. So I'll show you some handouts which I'm going to share, and this would be looking at just 1 second. Right, so going back to, if you see my screen now, looking at the concept of, how does learning happen within the organization? We need to look at 2 or 3 concepts. Now, very briefly, there is something which I mentioned earlier, which is called self-managed learning. Now, this was created by Professor Ian Cunningham, and this ran after a number of studies that he did, within a group of people, and he came across with the concept that sometimes experiences and learning can happen provided the person has done this thing on their own. So they basically came across with the concept of something called self-management, and this stands for a specific approach which involves self-development and that self-development happens primarily by actions of the person themselves. And this approach, when it is looked at from a process of, or from a perspective of, a process, talks about a management approach, which is how do people learn new skills, inherit new traits, or get new, let's say, learnings by looking at doing some of these things themselves. And that process of learning which happens within the organization is self-managed learning. And I'll give you a very simple example for this. Sometimes what happens is you put your hand, if you're using a lighter or if you're using a fire matchstick, if you burn your hand, that is learning that is happening at the personal level, and it's being done without, you cannot learn that you can burn your hand by not using the matchstick or the lighter correctly, and you can actually burn your finger, burn your hand. And that happens because you've done and gone through that experience yourself. So that is an example of something called self-managed learning. Now, sometimes what happens is you make mistakes when you work with an organization, when you have a job role, you make a mistake and you learn quickly from that mistake. Because you're doing that mistake yourself and you're learning from it, that basically tends to be self-managed learning. Nobody's coming in to tell you that you're doing this right, you're doing this wrong, but you're learning from the result of what has happened, and that tends to be something called self-managed learning. Okay? Now, there are some elements of how you learn, and those elements of learning can happen individually, it can happen in a group. This still tends to fall within the concept of something called self-managed learning. Now, there is another concept which basically talks about lifelong learning, right? That means lifelong learning. Lifelong learning means that as a person, I'm learning throughout my life. I'm learning every day. I'm learning new things every day. And this learning happens because of the fact that you are experiencing new things. You are being part of different teams. For example, if you work within a business or an organization, and in some cases you're trying out new things which is giving you the learning. Sometimes you get to see that you haven't done anything in terms of a sport before. For example, you haven't done water sports or you haven't done skiing, for example, before. But what you say is there are things that you do like cycling, swimming, some of these things that you do. And when you do it for the first time, you pick up that skill or that trait forever. So like you will learn cycling once, you know the cycling, how to cycle for throughout your life. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So there are some skills that you're able to pick up. Like if you learn to swim, if you don't know swimming and you learn to swim, once you've learned swimming, you can swim throughout your life, isn't it?
Yes.
You don't need to learn that trait again. You do not need to learn that skill again. When people are trying to learn how to bike or how to cycle, what tends to happen is they tend to fall, you need a bit of support. But once you pick that up as a trade and you're able to cycle on your own throughout your life. You don't need that skill or coaching or maybe, mentoring how to ride a bicycle again in your life, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So there are skills that you pick up. Those are skills that you pick up which are called lifelong skills. But these skills require a bit of learning and a bit of coaching maybe in some cases. And once you pick that up, you pick it up for life. And that is where you will say it is lifelong learning.
But in the process where you learn something today and maybe you do not put it to practice or put it to use for years and you lose it, where would that fall? For instance, let me give you an example. If you're in a country and you're able to learn to speak their language, and maybe after some years you return to your homeland and you don't get people to speak that language with you tend to lose it because you're not interacting much with it anymore. So in that situation, what would you call that?
That is also something which is lifelong learning, but what tends to happen is there are certain things that you can learn to know, you can learn to do, but when you sometimes are not in that situation or in that environment, you can also tend to forget. But if you have to pick that up again, you'll have to again go through the process of self-managed learning. So in the case of languages, what tends to happen is you will see that when you do not speak the language and when you're not in that environment, as you're rightly saying, in that country, you tend to loosen up or you tend to kind of lose that skill. Like if you learn to speak Spanish when you're in Argentina or, when you're there.
I'm saying this because I know I'm speaking little Spanish because I'm here, but what if I return to Nigeria and I don't get to speak it anymore? I would lose it. And by the time I get back to this country and listen to people speak it, it becomes new again to me. Of course, you would know some words, but it wouldn't sound like
that you have. Correct. I agree. So in that case, what tends to happen is you have to follow something called self-managed learning, because languages you can get coaching for, you can get into classes, you can get tutorials, and when you get coaching and you're not speaking, you can forget. So in those cases, I will classify language as something called self-managed learning. Even things that I've given you examples of, like swimming. If you've done swimming, you've learned it, but you've not done swimming for 15, 20 years, and sometimes when you go into the water, you can't swim. That means you've lost that skill. So it is something which is a process of self-managed learning. But in some cases, when you look at lifelong learning, you have to look at certain things in which you are working in that environment. You are basically, because of the environment that you are in, you are able to acquire that knowledge, and that knowledge stays with you because you're using it on a day in, day out basis. So when we relate this concept of self-managed learning, lifelong learning, and we put this to an organizational thing, what you tend to see is why organizations do trainings every year. Why do they run same seminars or same trainings every year? Is because people tend to forget. And because you tend to forget, what you want to do is you want to be able to sharpen up those skills. And that is where the terminology comes in, that you need to be able to attend that sales training again, or the training again on a particular, say, skill, because they tend to feel, managers tend to then observe that you have lost that edge. And in order to get that back in terms of knowledge, in terms of being cutting edge in terms of that knowledge that you need, you have to do training again. So the importance of what I'm trying to correlate to, and you've said that correctly, is that why organizations will have to do this again is because when you work in an environment, if you are not in that working environment, you tend to forget or lose those things, or lose those skills. So why organizations look at the concept of flexibility, and when they look at the concept of learning, they look at this and they put these schedules and programs and trainings, calendars in place, because they want the employees to have that available, because it is required as a skill for them to be able to work efficiently or productively. Okay?
Yes.
So good stuff. So I'm glad that we've discussed the learning outcome today in totality. And after session, it will take about 10 or 15 minutes. Once I get the recording and it comes to me on the, I'm going to then send us the recording. I'll put this up on Moodle, and also I will send you these 2-3 handouts which I have got. and I'll show them to you. One is a handout which I'm going to send specifically to you, which talks about coaching and mentoring, because this will also be useful for you to look at doing the tasks of the assignment. Okay, this is one handout I want you to go through so that you understand, crystallize the concepts that we've discussed today in terms of differences of coaching and learning. That's one. Second that you will see is obviously the presentation which I have gone through today in a bit more detail, and this covers the concept of management, in particular the management theories, and I will send you a bit of a handout which talks about summarizing all the management theories. Okay? A third will be a few slides that I'll pick out which primarily talk about the concept of learning within organizations, is related to task 2.2, and they will talk about the theoretical concept which is self-managed learning, lifelong learning, and why flexibility in terms of working and learning is applied within organizations. Okay. Good stuff. I've got this session with you now. The next sessions are with you next week, but you will have the copy of the recordings.
You sent me an invite for lectures next week, so it's better we finalize it now, so I don't keep waiting, and in the end I will not receive lectures.
No, that's fine.
I don't my money. I also want to sit. We have one on Thursday, which is July 5, and another one on Friday, July 6.
Thursday, Friday. Both the sessions are next week, Thursday, Friday. I don't think it will happen again, but my suggestion would be that you do not need to wait for the class. Just text me or WhatsApp me if I do not come on the session. But this will not happen because I think I missed out, for some reason. I don't want to give lame excuses, but yeah, we will do the sessions next week.
Okay. Then the thing